Afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our afternoon session of Illuminating the Path to Reconciliation. My name is Michael Allen, Councillor of the City of Regina and the SUMA Director, and I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on Treaty 4 land in the traditional home of the Métis. I think by now you have had a chance to look through your conference brochure and so on, and you know that the AED and services are noted on pages in there, and you've had a look at that, I hope. Also by now that you know that this will be on the SUMA YouTube at the end of the month. So when you come up to the microphone for the last 15 minutes to ask questions, I ask you to identify yourself by name, your municipality, speak clearly into the mic, and we will record the session and then you can watch later. Or those of you that from your council colleagues that couldn't be here will have a chance to see that as well. One of the important things that we try to do at SUMA is put topics before you that are important, and I think that's certainly the case this afternoon. This is something that is before all of our communities, and I'm thrilled, honestly, that all of you are here to take and learn from the people that are before us. This session is sponsored by MNP, and we have Jennifer Lester, who is the Senior Manager of Consulting here on their behalf to introduce our speakers, which, by the way, I'm going to do. She's going to bring greetings, and then I will introduce the speakers after, and we'll get started. So would you please give a warm welcome for Jennifer Lester, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I should say I am not the best public speaker in my family. I think some of you might have heard, I have to give her a little plug. At the lunch today, that was my daughter who spoke, so she doesn't, she did great.
Is that your daughter?
Does not get the comfort level from me. So again, hi, I'm Jennifer Lester, and I am a Senior Manager with MNP, and I have a special focus on Aboriginal and First Nation clients in my work. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's session, Illuminating the Path to Reconciliation. MNP is a proud sponsor of today's session. This is a tremendous opportunity for all Canadians as we work towards achieving reconciliation, and there is much to be done together. I'm looking forward to the discussion today from our panel in order to better understand the opportunities ahead and our role as leaders. I wanted to provide you with some context on why MNP thought it was important to have a visible role at this session today. MNP is the largest provider of professional services to First Nation communities and organizations in Saskatchewan and Canada. We are the auditors and financial advisors to over half the First Nation communities in this province, and we are trusted business advisors to the majority of First Nation entities across Saskatchewan. We are firm believers in the importance of the calls to action outlined by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. For over 60 years, MNP has supported First Nations across Canada with assurance, helping the pursuit of economic opportunities such as buying and selling of businesses, and through the redesign of organizational structures and those related operations. We as a team ensure our work is based on mutual understanding and respect, a core value of the 92nd call to action. I believe each of us has an important leadership role to play to achieve reconciliation. As a partner, we look forward to exploring how MNP may be a bridge to support this meaningful dialogue and the new relationships between Saskatchewan's municipalities and First Nation communities. Today's session on reconciliation is critical to ensure the conversations on what reconciliation means continue, and to ensure we all better understand how to support and implement the 94 calls to action in our own communities and in our individual activities in Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Thanks, and I just want to give you some parental reassurance. Your daughter's a star, absolute star. Can I introduce the people that are on the stage who will do the presentation? I'm going to begin with Mayor Cheryl Spence, Mayor Charlie Clark, Mayor Michael Fougere, Mayor Rob Hundeby, Mayor Bobby Woods, and leading us in the Treaty Commissioner's office is Ryan Sangster. And Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Yeah. Clicker. Thank you very much. I would first of all like to credit SUMA and thank SUMA for bringing this panel together today and having this discussion. I think it's an important one, and I thank all the people who are up on the stage for having the courage to come in front of all their colleagues and talk about their work on reconciliation. So thank you for that. Just a little bit of an introduction of myself. This is my family. I'm a father of 3 young kids under 8. So spare time is at a minimum. And this is us up at Fur Lake, which is up near Shell Lake, north of Saskatoon, about 2 hours. I grew up in small town Saskatchewan, in Simpson, and then Watrous, and then Tisdale, and graduated high school in Saskatoon and went to university in Saskatoon. These are some of my ancestors. So my great-grandmother there came from Germany, and and my great-grandfather from England. They married in Wisconsin area. They had come in the 1870s or so, and then came up to southeast Saskatchewan, around Stoughton area, around 1900. And so why do I give you all this? It's just sort of a bit of a long-winded way of recognizing Treaty 4 territory and recognizing that I wouldn't be here, that my ancestors wouldn't be here without the treaties and without the relationships and the agreements that have come before me. And so I recognize that this is Treaty 4 territory in the land of the Métis, and it's one of the lessons that I've learned in my 3 years working on reconciliation is that reconciliation in part is about reconnecting with our ancestors and knowing where we've come from so that we can know where we are and know that where we can go from here. So I just throw that out there. I work for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. We're a federal commission. We have our mandate from both the FSIN, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, and the federal government. And we have a twofold mission. We have a treaty table where we attempt to facilitate a common understanding of the treaties and what they mean in a modern context. And we advocate for a treaty relationship as well. A little bit on reconciliation. That's a big word. What does it mean? There's a lot of definitions of it out there. I like this definition that Chief Willie Littlechild, who is one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners, uses. He uses the Cree word of miawakutuan, which I understand meaning having good relationships. He also talks about wepanasun, which is a sort of a centering and a coming back from a healing, from a regaining balance. My background is in international relations and in reconciliation and peace building. They talk about how it's both a goal that we're reaching for, but it's also a process that we get there. And it's about building a new relationship where we understand each other better and we work together for a better future. Why are we even talking about reconciliation? Our office gives these seminars in 1 or 2 days often about reconciliation, about the treaties, but I'll try to do it in about 30 seconds. The treaties, so Treaty 4, 1874, the Cree and the Saulteaux, mostly people of this land, decided that it was in their interest to have a relationship with the Crown, the Government of Canada, to share the land and to come together as nations, each keeping their sovereignty, but each agreeing to share the land and move forward together. Unfortunately, right from the start, the government saw it more as a real estate transaction and didn't really see it as the relationship piece. And unfortunately, the relationship that was intended has not happened. So things like residential schools, things like the 60s scoop, policies that have been really attempted to assimilate Indigenous peoples and control power have happened. And so what we have now is sort of we're trying to return to the spirit and intent of treaty. And that's really what reconciliation is all about, is how do we get to that relationship that was intended in 1874 and Treaty 4, and how do we build that moving forward? So Office of the Treaty Commissioner has been doing quite a bit of work on reconciliation. We have sort of a threefold strategy, and the first one is about public engagement. So there's actually a ton of really, really good work happening in this province around reconciliation. Unfortunately, we don't hear as much about it as we would like. Of course, the negative stories sell, and those are the ones that you maybe hear. But one of the things we've been trying to do is to get those stories out and hear from people that are doing work and promote learning. There is no one way to do reconciliation, so we need to learn from each other. The second part of what we've been doing is coalitions of community champions. So we have some of the members here today, the mayors, Saskatoon, Regina, Lloydminster and Onion Lake, and we've just started a little bit in Worman as well, to sort of say who are the champions in a community. who are the movers and shakers, the people that can get things done from all of our communities, from Indigenous communities, from non-Indigenous communities, from the business community, the governments, and let's bring them together and let's see where the energy goes, and let's try to build relationships and trust and as a way of moving forward. The third strategy is we've been working on a vision for reconciliation. We have this idea that if we can all agree on where we're moving in a generation, that we can all get on board and kind of do whatever we do best to get there together. So just without stealing some of the thunder of our mayors who are about to speak, but Saskatoon is sort of the oldest coalition that we've been working since 2006. We started shortly after the Truth and Reconciliation report came out, where about 7 organizations in the city came together and said, how can we engage the public on residential schools and reconciliation? We engaged and we developed a public engagement strategy. We developed this logo, and we decided we would host a walk for reconciliation. And we would also kind of gather all the events that were already happening in the community and put them together in a calendar of events and promote them together. And through that, we've developed trust and we've developed relationships among a circle. We started with 7. By the end of the first year, we were 30. Now we're at about 72 organizations that meet monthly, coming together. We're at a stage now where we actually have to figure out how do we manage 72 organizations coming together every month. It's not easy to make that happen. So here's some of the pictures. So we had a flag raising at City Hall. We've had that twice now in Saskatoon. We had a walk for reconciliation last year. It's a bit like a fishing story. The walk gets bigger every time you talk about it, but it's roughly between 4,000 and 5,000 people came out on a Wednesday morning to walk for reconciliation and celebrate our diversity. Regina is the second group that has been going, and we started a little bit different. That we started big with 85 and have been paring it down. We've got a steering group of 40 now. We've worked to develop a set of goals and principles that we share, and we're working now on a launch and some public events to get us going there. So this is the group, so Heart of Treaty 6 Reconciliation is the group. We took a long time to figure out a name because it's not Lloydminster, it's not Onion Lake, it's not Frog Lake, so we had to find some kind of a name that encapsulates everybody. And if you look at the map of Treaty 6, the Lloydminster Onion Lake region is right in the heart of Treaty 6, so that's our name. We're talking about having a joint declaration, a signing of reconciliation on March 21st. And we started some different events, public engagement, public education events. We've also been working on the vision, as I was saying. And here we asked people, in a generation from now, if you were talking to your grandkids or young niece or nephew and you were saying that 2018 was where things started to change and that you were really proud of what has happened since then and that you were excited about it, what was the story you'd be telling those young people about what has changed? And we've asked that in various forms, and we took those themes and we pulled it together into a vision, and then we kind of been testing it for about a year, and now we're revising it. But essentially it's looking at 4 elements of reconciliation. So people have told us that reconciliation at generation would mean, first of all, having a shared understanding of our history and starting to that healing process from that history. Second of all, we would have authentic relationships. We'd have trust and relationships amongst each other, amongst all people. Thirdly, we would have strong cultures and a sharing of knowledge among those cultures, sort of braiding together of those cultures. And fourthly, we would have social and political and economic change that benefits, so that we make sure our systems and our institutions benefit all of us. So right now, our next step is we've been working with the University of Saskatchewan to say, how do we measure that? How would we actually create a template to measure that? And then we would like to create a system that, or a model that hopefully all of you can use for your work, or you can use in your communities to think, okay, where are we in those 4 elements of reconciliation, and how can we move forward? And we'd also like to sort of develop a bit of a toolkit. So Office of the Treaty Commissioner has been working in a lot of these communities, but we're a small office. We can't be everywhere. So how do we extend our reach and things like that? So stay tuned. We'd like to be working with your communities and feel free to be in touch with us at any time. So that's a little bit of the Office of the Treaty Commissioner and what we've been doing. I'm now going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and we've perhaps laughingly asked for 2 minutes of an introduction. Of course, 2 minutes for a politician, I don't know if that's ever happened before, but I would like to just maybe ask them to start with a little bit about where reconciliation is in your communities so far. So Mayor Woods, could you start, and we'll just head to that direction.
Okay, thank you. I just want to first of all say that I'm not an expert on reconciliation, but I live amongst people, my people of the Métis and the First Nations people. My wife and children are all First Nations. I happen to be a Métis person. And we also went through the same experiences with residential and boarding schools. And I also work for a First Nations community right now. And so we do have relationships because of those family dynamics. So that helps a lot for me and our communities as well. The community of Buffalo Narrows is predominantly a Métis community with a mixture of First Nations and non-Aboriginal people. And again, when people come into our community, it's nice to see the respect that's shown and demonstrated amongst ourselves and with each other. I'm not saying it's 100%, but we all know that you're never going to get full participation and understanding from any community. So, but the best thing that I see that's happening is that relationships have to start. Doesn't matter with who. If you want somebody to come and see you, you got to open your door. And it works the other way as well. They open their door, you come in. And I use the family system as family dynamics as an example. I mean, when something goes wrong in the family, there's always somebody there to hold your hand, to walk you through things, to talk and to listen to you and support you. Plain and simple. And to me, that's where reconciliation needs to be. Once that happens, you get the other relationships going, maybe in business or, education, so on. And in northern Saskatchewan right now, it is a challenge. In our communities, we have next to nothing to turn to in terms of resources. For how many years we had to depend on government programs, and we shared our meeting rooms and our school rooms with the First Nations and the people that were there. That's how we got together, and that's how we remain today. And of course, we support one another. That's one of the biggest things that need to happen is support. And if you use that family system, doesn't matter what nationality you are, I really believe that we get along, we work together, we support one another, and things will work the way we want to go. All we're looking for is a healthy relationships, good, strong opportunities, not only opportunities to make a dollar for somebody else to have personal or gain for their community, financially or whatever. It's about the relationship overall. If you can turn to someone and say, I want you to be my friend, I want this to turn into a love relationship where we can support one another. And I see that happening. And there's some good starts. I look to our neighbors in the bigger urbans where they have the population, they have business, they got industry established there. And they're supporting our Aboriginal brothers and sisters to start urban reserves and being partnerships with business and industry. And we still need to look at that in northern Saskatchewan. There's still, I think, a lack of understanding by industry that comes in the north. We have a little bit of logging, and we have mining. The rest are government jobs, and unfortunately, a lot of it is social assistance. And we need to see those things change. It's not because people don't want to be independent is because there's really not much else to turn to. But we have lived a life where we made something out of nothing. And that's what I hear our people saying. With reconciliation, we shall prevail. And so will others. So will the people of our communities. And I want to say I'm glad that SUMA in 2017 put a policy together to participate with the reconciliation process. And I'm glad that it's coming out at this convention to say, hey, Saskatchewan, let's work together. Let's support our First Nations community and let's have them support us. But first and foremost, the most important thing, ladies and gentlemen, is let's work together. Let's create that friendship, that relationship, and that issue of trust needs to be positive. And we look at things from a positive perspective, it can't be nothing but good. So thank you for...
Thank you, Mayor Liz. Mayor Hundeby, how is reconciliation in Elbow?
Well, the reason I struggle with this because too with reconciliation, it's such a broad scope. As I was sitting outside, even just before this was going to be, there was kind of a comment made, well, the village of Elbow, why are they even here? So I think even though we're small, I still think that everybody in this province has a key role in moving forward. For myself, the major part of my journey began last year, 2017, at SUMA in Saskatoon. Chief Cameron was here and he spoke about reconciliation. And I guess I felt really guilty about some of the previous thoughts or words or actions that I may have told. A lot of people would probably say, well, they're not that serious. But off-color jokes or they are serious. You think First Nations people are lazy or they don't want to work? You think that they're looking for government handouts? It's a very serious issue, and I think the mindset has to change. So leaving the SUMA conference, or I was actually at the SUMA conference, I went and spoke with Chief Cameron after his talk, and I just said, I apologize. I'm sorry for my thoughts, my words, my actions, and I'm asking for forgiveness. And he was very encouraged by that. He supported me, and throughout the next weeks and months, I guess we were targeted with doing a public apology. And if I was, I don't know what to use the term, if I was flipping burgers at McDonald's and my name was Rob Hundeby, probably wouldn't have got the news or acclaim it did. But having the title of mayor, not only did we get provincial or national news, it was international news. And the memorandum of understanding that we signed of a village of 337 people actually is recognized by the United Nations. And so I'm proud of that. I think we are making a change. I know Regina's followed suit. I know some other cities have followed suit. And so I am encouraged by that. I know for myself, I have a long ways to go. But hopefully I can be of some encouragement to other people here today.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Fougere?
Thank you, Rhett, and good afternoon, everyone. Is my microphone on? Can you hear me? Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you so much, and I want to thank my colleagues up here who are reflecting on their personal views and also the views of their council and their experience going forward. I see a lot of positive things happening in our province, and I think we're sort of in an era of reconciliation. It's an awakening, not just in Saskatchewan, but I think across the country. And as I have been honored to be part of a process through City Council, my two colleagues here, Councilor O'Donnell and Councilor Young, represent my entire council, who has been very supportive of reconciliation in the strongest possible way. A motion last spring from our council talked about how can the city of Regina begin to work on the calls to action that are principally related to municipalities as a starting point. And very proud to say that one of the first things we looked at was the Regina Indian Industrial School site on the west side of the city, Pinkey Road. And we worked very hard as a council with our community to honor that and to commemorate it, provide that it is a municipal heritage site, working with the federal government now to see if we can have perhaps a land swap that would allow the site to be maintained in a way that's really honorable and respectful. So we've done a lot of things, I think, and I'm very proud of what we've done, but we have a lot of work to do, and I think really if you want to talk about, to get to the truth, you have to have reconciliation first. And these are all very powerful terms, and they're very emotive terms for everyone, and they mean something different to everyone. So we passed the motion from council. We began to look at the Rise Cemetery site. We've looked at, even in past years, we're the first municipality in Canada to fly a Treaty 4 flag, or the treaty flag at City Hall. It's been there for a number of years, and we're very, very proud of doing that. Former Mayor Fiacco did that. That was part of the beginning of the process, but in more detail, we have Reconciliation Regina, which Rhett talked about. We have, my numbers anyway, about 70 organizations that are together. It's not led by the city of Regina. It's led by the community. It's led by them. And we're looking for a community action plan as to how the organizations, be the school boards, the Chamber of Commerce, and others, what do they see, what they can do to implement those calls to action. So it's a community action plan from the ground up, and that's so important. It's not led by the pair of glasses that the city council would have or some other organization. It's very organic, and I think it's working well, but it's also expanding in its size and mandate, and it's getting quite large, which is all very, very positive. We have signed the MOU that Rob just talked about with the FSIN. And that's important because it talks about our perspective with respect to racism and how we want to educate our City of Regina staff and council as to the kinds of things that have happened. Because I think we're all here to understand, in my view, that there's been some tremendous injustices done, unintentionally or otherwise, to our Indigenous people. In order for us to live in harmony, to move forward together, to provide opportunities for Indigenous people, we must recognize what has happened, and we must walk arm in arm together into the future. No one has a monopoly on knowledge of this. I certainly don't. Certainly our council does not. But we want to be a part of the solution to this problem that we have. But I can tell you, as a mayor of one of the big city mayors in Canada, our country is having a dialogue of respect and peace. There's some emotions, no question about that. But you look around the world when you talk about injustice and racism and intolerance, we have a very different kind of perspective happening around the world. So the leaders around this table here and across our province should be saluted, and residents too, obviously everyone, for a respectful but painful conversation about how we can correct the mistakes of the past and move forward into the future. Rhett, I want to thank you personally for the work you're doing for Reconciliation Regina. I know that you've been doing this in other organizations, other cities in the province. You're a leader on helping our city provide a framework to move forward in a respectful way that's very, very inclusive. And you'll be hearing lots about, I hope in the next coming months, Regina, when we have our official public event, if you will. We haven't decided what it's going to be yet or when it will be. We want to make sure that the audience that needs to hear this are First Nations, Indigenous people, to know we're serious, but it's also the rest of Regina that realizes we have some work to do here. And there's some interesting things that we're going to do to break down those barriers of intolerance, misunderstanding, to educate in a respectful way so we can provide that Indigenous people can live in fullness in our society, open arms, and move forward in a respectful way and completely participate in our economic and political, social life that's so very, very important. So we've done lots of things. The Mama Way to the Center is for us, does a lot of work for our inner city. North Central also does a lot with respect to moving forward on reconciliation, and it's a great partnership with the school boards, the province, the city, the police service, the library, all come together to provide a focal point for those who live in North Central and around the city. So those are my opening comments, Rhett, and I can certainly answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fougere. Mayor Clark, I don't know if my microphone is on.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? So I also want to thank SUMA for putting this panel on and having this be part of the conversation today, and to all my colleagues in the Office of the Treaty Commissioner who are here, and all of you who've come out to be part of this discussion today. Because, to be honest, it's a tough conversation right now, I would say, and this whole reconciliation is touchy, and there can be emotion related to it. I would say it's also one of the really defining issues of our province in terms of whether we as community leaders can find a path forward where we find a way to work together between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And you know, when in a number of the different gatherings that I've been in Saskatoon, one elder in particular, Métis elder Maria Campbell in our community, whenever she starts a meeting, she says, as we prepare for this meeting and as we think about what it is that we're here together to do, let's put our children at the center of this meeting. And I think of Sydney Lester, you know, that bundle of energy who is there. I think the work, if we can put our minds to what is it, and I think, as you said, Rhett, if you think 40 years ahead, what is it that we want for all of the children growing up in our province in the future? And what can we do at this moment in the history of this province to help find a path that's better than what the past several generations have been in our province or in our country? And I say that because I actually went to high school in a different province. I went to high school in British Columbia in a town of Penticton, about 25,000 people. And in my experience as a young person growing up as a young Canadian, we had First Nations people in our high school, in our community, and not so much in the community of Penticton, but across the river in the Okanagan First Nations band. And there were two solitudes. What I knew about Indians, as we called them, as a high school student, was that they were good fighters. So you wanted to kind of, you know, keep your distance, and not much else beyond that. Even though we coexisted in the same community, and coming to, you know, I married a girl from Saskatoon, and have been here for 18 years in this province, and come to love it and to know it, and have found that this story across the country of two solitudes is so common, where we live side by side, but we don't, more often than not, there hasn't been a basis to get to know one another. And I think reconciliation, from everything that I've seen, starts with finding a reason to talk to one another, some opportunity to sit down and talk about your children, talk about the weather, talk about sports. And in Saskatoon, I would say that has been, the people who have been the bridge builders are those people who have found whether it's played on sports teams together or had to sort out issues within schools together or other things that have started the process. And when I became elected as mayor, just to fast forward, I guess, to sort of figuring this out as a community, I sat down with some members of the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, with the members of Reconciliation Saskatoon, this group that's now 72 organizations. And I felt as though I needed to have an answer, because I was the mayor, and mayors have to have answers. So I was going to meet with this group and tell them my blueprint for reconciliation, right? And I didn't, going into the meeting, I didn't know what the blueprint for reconciliation was, but you're the leader, you're supposed to have. So I said, well, you know, we're going to try and promote more economic development partnerships with our members, and maybe we can have a gathering in the community to talk about the progress that we've made, and we can, and it was sort of a list of tasks, and all the people who'd spent time as a group building relationships almost looked at me blankly, and they said, we're not looking for the mayors to have the answers here and to lay out the blueprint. This is a process where we need to build relationships, and it's almost it's so different than building a bridge or fixing potholes or solving, getting people's back lanes graded or all the everyday things that we're doing. Reconciliation exists in a different place, I think. I think that our job as community leaders is to recognize that we don't know what the next steps are, but that we need to do something different for the next generation of young people, and find a reason to talk with our neighbors, with our community members, with our community leaders, and figure that path out together. And I am proud of the number of people and groups. And we recently had an event that the Saskatoon Foundation put on that was in this theme of reconciliation. It was a big community fundraiser, and a number of business organizations came forward and were asked to talk about their commitments to reconciliation. And a number of them said, including I remember the Home Builders Executive Director said, okay, well, I'm realizing that the home builder said, we've never really thought about this before, so we don't even know what to say. And there was almost a sense of being ashamed because there wasn't more that they could say about what they were doing or what they had done to build relationships. That's the first step, is to say, you know what, we're not really sure what we need to do, but we know in order to make this province work for the next generations, we have to work together. That's the biggest lesson I've had, is that the more you recognize that you just have to take the next step and be willing to learn from it, the more progress that we're going to make together in our time as community leaders that we have to try and make that better future.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Just to build on your points, I was at a session maybe about a year ago with Maria Wilson, one of the commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and she talked about how reconciliation is hard because we don't know each other. We're talking about reconciling with people we don't know. Unfortunately, our history is such that Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities have been separate for a long time. So I think, Mayor Clark, you're right. It's about creating those spaces where we can get to know each other, and it's really simple, but it's really hard. So, yeah. Mayor Spence, how about in Worman?
Well, again, am I on? Okay. Can you hear me back there? Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Thank you to my colleagues and to Rhett for all the work that you do. I kind of feel like a novice in the room. Worman is brand new. Our journey is only just over a year old, and Worman is located about 14 kilometers from the downtown Worman to downtown Saskatoon is 14 kilometers. So Saskatoon has been really good role models in truth and reconciliation for Worman. We have been watching and we've been learning. I have prepared, and I am the fifth speaker, so a lot of this is going to be repetitious, but I guess it'll just be repetitious. It's important. It has been quoted, and Rhett just said it, but it's something that is really stuck in my mind, and it is hard to reconcile with someone you don't know. So as a result, Council and administration in Worman have made it their goal to become better informed in First Nations history, to learn and experience the culture, and to encourage and facilitate Indigenous training in our community with our staff. To make important the responsibility of truth and reconciliation, the calls for action, particularly number 57, which deals directly with municipalities. With the help of our local Great Plains College, who has definitely been our leader, we have participated and partnered in Indigenous trainings, ceremonies, the walk, and just recently we're forming a regional reconciliation committee, which Rhett has been a part of. And actually it started, when we first started talking about this, at the community college level, we were talking about, because I had been to Saskatoon reconciliation and I was just at awe at what they were doing there. The gal that I'm working with at the college said, well, why don't we do something like that in Worman? And I was encouraged, of course, yeah, let's try it. Before I knew it, we thought, Worman? No way, let's do something regional. Because when it comes to rural, a lot of times, we don't, in Worman, for instance, we're mainly non-Indigenous. There's very few First Nations people that live in Worman, but our community is becoming quite diverse. So in our minds, this is important. It doesn't matter how many people are living in your community. Is there a reason they're not living in our community? I don't know. We just know that we want to be a welcoming community. So we struck this committee, this regional committee, and I see that we have Abe from Osier, the mayor of Osier. He's here today, and Osier is a part of it. Martinsville's a part of it. The RM's a part of it in the RM of Corman Park. And so we're really excited about the work that we're going to do in that committee. It is our hope that these new partnerships will nurture pathways that will lead to real relationships with First Nations, Métis, Aboriginals, and our diverse community as a whole, because our community is really starting to shift. We believe by building these relationships with an open heart, we will move our reconciliation paths forward together, building unity one step at a time. And I just have a kind of something, a fact here that I don't know if you know, but 100 years ago, 7,000 Canadian Indigenous people made important contributions during the First World War, the Second World War, and the Korean War. The Indigenous women, they worked as overseas nurses. So 100 years ago, we stood side by side together, supporting and fighting for our freedoms, the same freedoms. And I believe this is what we should be doing today. I believe that we should be walking arm in arm and looking at whatever is before us together. This is hard, and it's hard because it's very personal. It's very personal. But I think that the only way it's going to work is if we are doing it together. So with that sentiment, Worman City Council has made this a priority in our community. So do we know what we're doing? No, we really don't. We're really depending very heavily on Great Plains College and our advisor there, and also the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, and the example of the partners that we have seen up here on stage. And we will find our way. The one thing we do know, though, is that we do need our Indigenous partners helping us. And when we had the regional committee meeting, we had 2 bands that came that day, and that is really important. It's really important that we're walking this walk together, because if we're doing it by ourselves, we're going to fumble. It's not going to work. We need to do it together. So that is our goal, to look and find a way that we can work together in this, that we can build strong partnerships and become friends, build a strong community. We all have the same goals, and that's to have a generation, our next generations, to be strong and have all the opportunities for our children. So when you talk about children being at the heart of it, they are. Our children are also important to us. They're important to all of us, and we want to make sure that they're successful, and that is our goal. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I want to throw a question out. We don't have to go in order, but I heard this even this morning, talking to someone today, saying that when you look at the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, that there's not much in there for municipalities, that it's more aimed at federal, provincial level governments. I'm not quite sure that that's true, but I wanted to throw that out to all of you. Where is the role for mayors and councils in reconciliation? So anybody, Fougere, you want to?
I'll certainly start the discussion, but from my perspective, I think that the mayor and council play a pivotal role in understanding and working forward to reconciliation. We are closest to the people as order of government. We set the tone for discussion. We set in many ways, the priorities for discussion around our community. And whereas we as council, and all our councils are united in a statement of a process to go through, we have the attention of residents. We have the attention of different orders of government. The province would know that we have passed resolutions through council to move forward, and we have reconciliation Regina happening. So we have a role to play of shaping and informing public opinion on what matters in our community. And if we say as council, and we have done this, that reconciliation is extremely important to our community for the healing and for the growth and for the prosperity of our community, then I think that people will understand that they will accept that. So we don't have a legislated way. We're not an order of government. We're an act of the legislature. But our power of being close to the people, the service that we provide, the fact that our councilors and myself are always available to be seen in the public and go to many, many events. we set the tone, we set in many ways, the public debate on these kinds of issues. So it's vitally important. If we were not part of this discussion, I think we would see a more antiseptic, more distant discussion on what it means in people's lives day by day.
Anybody want to add to that? Mayor Hundeby?
I think we can do a lot of things on the local level. Within the last year, once again, I don't want to highlight the fact that we are only 337 people, but when you are only 337 people, it means that a lot of people are doing a lot of the volunteering. You keep going back to the same well for people to volunteer their time, to make the donations, to make things happen. But we've had the library put on the Indian Ernie book reading. We had the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan came and hosted a board meeting in Elbow. At our Canada Day celebrations, we had the Creeland Dancers. Culture Days in Elbow had over 60% attendance of our population. We had, as council, 100% of the elected officials and full-time staff were given a copy both of the treaty implementation principles and the Truth and Reconciliation's call to action, and I'm hoping they were read. The local K-12 school wanted to participate in the processing of further education of eliminating racism. That's a lot for a small town. And I think SUMA is represented obviously by major cities, and I think Mayor Clark, Mayor Fougere, it's amazing that you guys are here. When you take a look at the provincial politics, we have a premier, probably Minister of Finance, Minister of Education, Minister of Health, and you two individuals represent 50% of our population. And by the stand that you guys are taking, that you guys are up here today, part of the panel, I just want to commend you two for taking that stand, because 50% of the population is seeing the leadership that you guys are providing. We can provide it in small towns, but I think it's critical that the cities and the towns give a positive approach to this reconciliation, because it's tough. It is not easy when your friends call you racist Rob after you come out and issue a public apology. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat? Because I've had people stick up for me at the rink, at the local watering hole, areas like that. The change is happening. But I think we need to have the tough conversations of what's going on currently is not right. It's front and center. The whole Colton Bushy, Gerald Stanley trial's on right now. Nobody wants to talk about it because you're afraid to say something wrong. But I guarantee you, right now, Gerald Stanley wishes he's not on trial for murder, that things are different. I guarantee you the friends and family of Colton Bushy, they want him back, right? It's tough, but we need to break down. We need to ask forgiveness, both sides. And I hope, Bobby Woods, I hope you agree with me. Racism can go both ways. And I think we need to break down these barriers. We need to have tough conversations. Learn from the past, but move forward.
Bobby, do you want to?
Yeah, no, yeah. I, agree. And it's that way. I said there's two doors to everything. And we need to create a relationship both ways. And that's why I say that I'm glad to be here today to share, at least to get this started. To be able to relate to some of the things I recognize. I also commend the two mayors from the larger cities here, because they are hosting a lot of things here that help people open their eyes. Of course, there's a lot of media around in the cities. When we do things up in our part of the country, you don't see media coming up there, but they put something on at the magnitude that they can offer here. The big powwows, the regional meetings, the provincial meetings. You're gonna have media there, and that's where it needs to show. As a mayor of my community, people look at me as saying, well, you gotta be the role model. You've gotta be the person that set the standard here for people to say, oh, okay, that's what we need to do. That's what we should do. We need to work together. And in small communities, it's easy. But as my friend and colleague here said, we get criticized a lot. And it all depends, and it comes down to how I take that criticism and how I can turn it around and make it positive. And that's one of the keys. Yeah, there's gonna be people out there, and I talk about the social problems that we face on a daily basis. Not only First Nations, not only Métis, not only non-Aboriginal people, but as human beings. And once we work on that, and the problems will become a lot easier to handle. It's going to be a hell of a process here. It's going to take a lot of work, and I'm glad to see the mayor sitting here, because I know they got heavy agendas for themselves, but to take the time out to come here. But I want to see down the road also that we have more First Nations and Métis people sitting here, maybe a larger panel, and more people coming in to hear this, because once you get that media presence, it's going to go out, it's going to reach a lot further. When they're having things in Saskatoon, the mayors are up there saying, welcome to the First Nations people. Our city is open to you. That's what people say, wow, we never saw that before. Now we're seeing a lot of change. And I believe it, because I've seen it and I've heard it with my own ears. That's what we need to do as a province. Start spreading the word. And yes, like I said, it works both ways. We're not going to be able to make everybody happy, because that's choices that they have to make on their own. But if we give them good choice, a good opportunity for choices, they're going to make the wise choice to come along and be that friend. Nobody wants to be sitting on the outside looking in. You want to be inside. And, to me, that's one of the most important things. And again, thank you to the mayors here for, showing your support and your commitment to this very important issue.
Thank you.
Can I just
Mark,
speak to the question of what is the municipal government doesn't have any role in reconciliation? I think I was in Washington D.C. last week, where in that crazy country right now, the conversation was that it's the cities that are on the front lines, it's the communities that are on the front lines of working out the issues. A line that came out was, everything that comes out of Washington lands on the feet of the mayors, right? And we can say the same thing here. The federal government can say whatever it wants and set whatever policies they want. It's at the community level that we have to work out how we're going to solve these and address these problems in the everyday lives of people. And in Saskatchewan, in our communities, where do the kids that are going to, from reserves, end up going to high school when there isn't a high school in the reserve? It's in the towns and cities and communities that they're in. Where do people go shopping and to get their services? Where do people go for health care? The more we can create the conditions where we have a common understanding, and where those kids going to school find a good, welcoming environment to be there. I have 3 kids, all that I'm born and raised right here in Saskatchewan. And again, we think about what it is that we're looking forward for them in the future. It's in our communities that these things get worked out. And so I'm really glad to see President Orb here from SARM, because I feel like some of the defining issues that we have to work out along those lines is both this sort of issue of the relationship between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, and between the rural and the urban areas, that we are all bound up together in terms of what kind of province we're going to have. And sometimes we get pitted, or we get the sense that we're in opposition. And everybody in every community is facing various struggles. But the more we find, what we're finding in Saskatoon is with First Nations partners, there are tremendous opportunities. Whitecap First Nation has invested in the building of a school in the Stonebridge neighborhood to help augment what the school is going to become, so that now non-Aboriginal kids and Indigenous kids from Whitecap are going to school together, and everybody's benefiting from better amenities because we've found a partnership. Muskeg Lake First Nation is investing has invested in an urban reserve that has also invested in some of the roadways and services around there. They're creating jobs that people from the non-Indigenous community are getting on Muskeg Lake Reserve, and we're getting better services overall as a community. We're seeing millions of dollars of investment coming into the Saskatoon region and area, and First Nations companies employing non-Indigenous people and vice versa. But I also hear, from students who are going to the University of Saskatchewan or even the First Nations University, moving from a place like, I remember talking to a young fellow from Patronac, and he talked about how moving from Patronac to the city of Saskatoon might as well have been moving to an entirely different country, the culture shock and the difference and all of those things. To me, reconciliation is recognizing that each person wants to succeed in our province, and that is in our communities, if we can create the conditions where we think about that, and we think about the experience our neighbors are going through in building a good life, and how do we see opportunity to do that together as opposed to in two solitudes. That's where reconciliation, it's not going to be federal policy, it's going to be the actual outcomes of those people within our communities. And there are, as frustrating and challenging and sometimes demoralizing the situation can feel, there are some tremendous successes happening, and not just in Saskatoon, in many parts of the province, because people have reached out and found a way to work together.
Mine is really short. Really short. I think everybody needs to be champions for reconciliation. Everyone in this room, everyone needs to be champions, but it always starts with your leaders. They need to be good role models and not afraid to stand up for this. So I challenge you to be champions.
Great, thank you. I'm curious to know if any of you have any advice. Again, sometimes the hardest part is just starting, and there's obviously lots of fear out there about doing or saying the wrong thing sometimes. Do you have any advice for your colleagues that are here today on how to get started on this type of work? And maybe Mayor Spence, since you've been the last two questions, I'll give you the first
Okay.
chance at the.
I think just get started. If you think it's important, and I don't know why you wouldn't think it's important, just get started. One step at a time. Look for the obvious partners. Get your, and it may not, someone said it's really easy if you have a small community to get everyone on side, get everyone, it's not. In fact, sometimes a smaller community can be harder. So quite honestly, I think you just take one step at a time. Look for the people that will champion to start off, and then just branch out. I think if you take too much of a big bite, it might be overwhelming. So start small, grow, and make sure that you've engaged the First Nation people that are in your community.
Mayor Woods, sure.
Thank you. I just want to say that I know nothing's really easy. There's always a challenge out there, and I said that right from the start. But in terms of what Mayor Charlie Clark said, about how we need to continue to engage our Aboriginal community, because it benefits their communities, but it also benefits the other side when we talk about the open door on each side. And again, the opportunities in smaller communities are not as big as they are in the cities. But we still need to encourage one another, and people that are sitting out here in the audience may have their own businesses, they may be tied to industry. Those are the people that need to also be invited in. The 26th of this month, there's another forum coming to Regina. It's called Aboriginal Business Match. That's another attempt to get the Aboriginal community involved with business, partnering up, and bringing the needs of our people to our communities. And we need people to be out there open to say, yeah, we want to go take a look. We don't always want to come to the cities to be able to, to get what we need. But we have needs up there. And when we sit around and we listen to, like Sask Power talked this morning about all the improvements they're doing, we just sit back and wish we had those opportunities. Right now, some of our communities are working on their own to be able to make that difference. We talk about solar energy. My colleague from Green Lake, Mayor Rick Richardson, is here. They have a small project going, but they also need more support in our communities to be able to move that forward. But it almost seems like people out there say a lot of times, we're forgotten about. Everything happens in the bigger urbans, even with us, because we're not a very big community in Buffalo Narrows, but we have a lot of small communities around. They say, oh, you guys are a bigger community. Look at all you get. I said, wow, But the challenges are there, and we challenge each other that way. And we need to encourage more business industry, communities to come up. We need to invite government to come up and see what we have so we can develop and start moving forward at a quicker pace. But again, I just want to go to another thing that Mayor Clark mentioned. When Elder Maria Campbell mentioned we want to put our children in the center so that we can focus. I'd like to see soon that we have some of those young children talk to us. That young lady out there today was a real inspiration to me to hear the way she spoke. So clear, so encouraging, and we need to have more of that. Our children can tell us so much. I've got an 8-year-old granddaughter that I've been raising since she was 2 months old. She goes to school, and we have a lot of non-Aboriginal kids go there. She doesn't know the difference between a Métis, a First Nations, and a non-Aboriginal. Her little friends are there. She'll just run up to them, and they're just hugs, and it's so nice to see that. That's the stuff I'd like to see. But I don't know if I'll know I'll never see that in my lifetime to what I'd like to, the expectations. But that's what we need. That's what we need to hear. We need each and every one of the people in here to encourage that kind of reception to one another so that it'll carry on. God, this is a one heck of a topic, and I know the government introduced it and whatnot, but yet even them at the times we see them going back in terms of what they say. It's a tough job, and sometimes they have to, but we got to put a lot of thought into it. That's one thing. And the other thing, we got to educate one another on in terms of who we are, and most of all, respect. Like those children, they don't give a darn who they are, what color they are, what religion they belong to. They just care for one another. That's the bottom line. And I think that's what reconciliation is about. It's about showing that we care, showing that we want to make a difference, and showing that we want to bring our community agendas forward so that we have all a healthy lifestyle and well-being for each one another. And again, I hear that here today.
One thing I would like to add to that too, you talk about kids or grandkids and things like that. Before Christmas, we had gone up to Midtown in Saskatoon, and I was a bit in awe, as a white male, I was definitely in the minority. And that's not, when you're in rural Saskatchewan, that's not normal. So, but after a day of shopping in the city and that, we came home in the evening, and I just casually had the discussion with my kids, did you guys notice anything different, whatever? And it doesn't matter if Filipino or First Nations or whatever, they don't notice the color of the skin. And so I think our future is really bright with the young people, but I don't think our generation or the one before or after me, that we should put the onus on the next generation. We're elected to government right now, so I think it's our problem. We should solve it. And that's what we've been elected to do, to tackle this head on. So let's not take the easy way out and give it to our kids or our grandkids as a mess that they'll fix. But one other thing that I want to highlight too, you ask, what can we do? And I'm not sure why I have this copy in my suit coat. but I do, and I guess it's really fitting. The Memorandum of Understanding that we signed, bear with me, it's only 30 seconds. It says it's between two parties, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and the Village of Elbow, and it's the elimination of racism throughout our ancestral lands and province. Racism towards Indigenous people is a learned behavior that persists in Saskatchewan. Racism endangers the lives of Indigenous people and threatens the peace and prosperity of this province. And these behaviors can be changed. Therefore, we commit to support this policy by providing additional education initiatives for all staff and elected officials, including the history of treaty residential schools and colonialism, and the treaty and inherent rights of Indigenous people. Why doesn't every town, village, city, RM? Why don't we all sign this? There's nothing in here that, if you don't want to sign it, I guess I would like to know why. So maybe the challenge by SUMA 2019 is that all municipalities have signed something similar with this with the FSIN. I believe that'd be a start. And I apologize, I know my CAO is back here, but I don't want to bombard you with requests of our signed copy, but I think if you need any advice or an actual copy of what we signed, please contact the Village of Elbow, and we'd be more than willing to help out with that. I know the Mayor of Regina, you guys have done the same
We signed
thing in
it,
Saskatoon, I believe, too. So let's get everybody to sign it.
So you ask what advice should we give? And I want to be, from my perspective, very clear here that we're all taking our first steps. We're not experts in front here. By any means, we are not. The first time you do something like this, or anything you do, you learn as you go forward. But I think that one of the principles that I think is important is that you always try to begin with the end in mind. What is it that you're trying to achieve by the actions you take today for our current generation and next generation? So you look at the definition of reconciliation, and Rhett, you had some definitions up here which I think are all very acceptable. I think they're great. But it is the dialogue between strangers that become friends. I think that's sort of what we're trying to achieve here. So for me, the advice I would give would be to begin with an open mind and try to remove your personal experience, or even if your prejudices or preconceived notions, in the discussion. Because council, in my view, city council, the mayor, are the bridge between different peoples. And the people we represent, at least in the case of Regina, we have many Indigenous people living in our city, coming off reserve, live in our city. We need to be the bridge to have that discussion take place. And I think if you do it with thinking with the end in mind, what you want to achieve, trying to be non-judgmental as you go forward. It's an organic process to go through. And certainly with Reconciliation Regina, our organization is very different than Charlie's. By definition, it's different because the people are different. But the organizations that are there, school boards, the province, our health district, the Chamber of Commerce, with council members that are there, all have different perspectives to bring forward. So an open mind, but I do think that advice is that council can be that bridge, can be that connector to have those kinds of discussions in a meaningful way.
Terry, last word, and then I think we'll go to questions here. And actually, I'm going to imagine there's people in the audience that have some advice for us as well. So if you have some things to share as well, or some questions, start thinking about that. So last word, Charlie.
The one thing from my own experience is that I've always been amazed at how much a gesture of not just hoping and asking for people from the Indigenous community to come and be at your council meeting or be at a board meeting, but to go to the community and participate at a round dance, at a powwow, to make a link to your chief and council and say, could I come and join you at one of your events and be there? has the level of welcome and greeting and just gratefulness to show up and not always have the dialogue happening on your terms, but go to where people are at. Because I know in Saskatoon there's a lot of groups that try and get people on their boards, and they try and have Indigenous, and a lot of people in the Indigenous community are running around and trying to represent a lot of things. But if you can take an evening and just ask to learn more about what's happening within the community, man, does that ever go a long way to building. It's about to getting that relation. And you may not accomplish anything tangible that night, but you will accomplish a great deal in terms of showing a genuine willingness to learn and grow. And what I've found is that has had the most impact from that relationship building side of my.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Great advice. There's a question in the front.
I'm too short. There we go. Mayor Nancy Brunt from the town of Kamsack. Whoa. Okay, our council has recently begun developing a relationship with the Chief and Council of Cody First Nations. We are hoping to get the same relationship going with Kisiku's First Nations and possibly even Key First Nations, all of which are very short distance north of us. They live in our community. They live north of our community. We're trying to get a lot of communication going that goes back and forth and is done in a positive manner. Our Canada Day celebrations this year involved a teepee and powwow dancers. I was actually invited to the friendship dance with them. That was unusual and different and a unique experience for myself. We were invited out to Cody Reserve for their powwow, and I was invited to participate in the welcoming and opening dance. Again, something unusual for a mayor in our small community. Communication is the most key thing that you can do. Exactly what you just said. Talk to people, get to know them, get to know their faces, have them become part of your community in a true and open manner. I have many First Nations people that I call my family because they are. They're my family. They're my friends. They're people I go to lunch with and I travel to Mexico with, you know. That's important. That's important on a personal level, and it's way more important on a political level. You have to be willing to get to know these people and have them get to know you. We live together. We work together. We need to talk together.
Hi, Rick Richardson, Mayor of Northern Village of Green Lake. Thank you for the shout out, Bobby. We are trying to reconcile as much as we can. However, there are some issues that I believe are really necessary to speak to here. The Métis, of which my community is predominantly, Bobby's community is predominantly, most of the northern communities are predominantly Métis. We're known as Canada's forgotten people. And one of the reasons for that is just like in this discussion here, we talk about First Nations and reconciliation with First Nations, not recognizing that the Métis were treated in exactly the same way. Matter of fact, my village, they actually decided in 1942 that they would deal with those road allowance problems. And so they took all the road allowance people, loaded them in train cars, had them watch their houses being burned, and moved them to Green Lake. They had set aside land there. Well, once the road allowance people didn't have any houses to go back to, problem solved. So they ignored the lands that were set aside in Green Lake. Now, the reason I bring this up is a part of reconciliation has got to involve the Métis. My grandfather joined up as a volunteer, and all Aboriginal families, Métis or First Nations, if they had people in the army, they've got a volunteer medal because none of them had to be forced to go. My grandfather was horribly wounded in World War I and still joined up and took all of his kids to World War II. Neither time were any of them given any benefits upon their return to Canada. Matter of fact, the homestead that my grandfather and grandmother, who was Métis, and my grandfather had given up his status to join the army, they homesteaded between the wars, and while he was off fighting World War II, that homestead was taken away under the War Expropriations Act of 1942. I'm sure it was coincidental that oil had been discovered in the area, but there it was. Came back homeless from 2 wars. The Daniels decision said that the Métis and the First Nations should be under the same umbrella. And all that sounds very good, but we have to actually speak in those terms as well. My cousin is the chief of Mistawassa's First Nation. My wife's cousin is the chief of Waterhen First Nation. All of our Métis people have relatives that are status, non-status. That was another arbitrary division to separate our families and weaken our people. We have to actually acknowledge those historic facts. We have to recognize that those are very important things. Yes, whenever there's a powwow in our region, I attend and I dance out in the grand entry. I'm there as a dignitary, I'm there as a mayor, I'm there to say, we're family, we should be dancing together regardless of what the government said. And that message is being heard loud and clear. About 1.5 years ago, I became an opportunity to actually get into reconciliation myself when I refused palliative radiation and chemotherapy for a type of cancer that was supposed to end my life by last August. When I did that, I made that choice knowing that our knowledge and our traditional knowledge of our people was valuable. And unless I told you, none of you would have guessed that I have terminal lung cancer that I was supposed to have died from last year. That's reconciliation. Standing up for those things where you notice that historically the schools, the churches, the government pushed our knowledge down and said, that's not valid. We have to all collectively and individually stand up and say these are the things that are important to us. We know that the people lived here for a long time before Columbus got lost. We know that they lived well for a reason. We have to acknowledge that knowledge, the traditional knowledge, coming into a modern society can benefit both of us. We're walking examples of that, just by the fact that we're sitting here talking about this. But one of the reasons why I wanted to come up here and speak has nothing to do with what I just said. It has everything to do with the fact that SUMA does not welcome the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations to these meetings. They are not members of SUMA, and therefore, even though their communities are large or small, just like mine, their voice could actually benefit us, and we would have a stronger voice to share if we would have them here, not just Bobby Cameron speaking at the beginning of it, or whoever the FSIN chief is at the time. They're very good, their words are powerful. But I'd love to see them sitting at our tables, being delegates to these meetings, representing their people just as we represent ours. And that's a challenge that I put out to SUMA as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Excellent points. And I think your point about the history is right, spot on, and those stories we don't know of the road allowance people, and those are the things we want to bring out. And an excellent challenge for SUMA as well. Thank you.
I'll go really quick. Dennis Helmuth, Mayor, Town of Rosthern. This conversation has been at once sobering and encouraging, and I'd like to thank SUMA for this opportunity to talk about this important topic. Town of Rosthern is located just north of Charlie City, about 45 minutes north of Saskatoon, and we, along with 8 other municipalities, including 3 RMs, we have a problem, and it's a problem you're going to wonder what the heck does it have to do with this topic. It's called solid waste management. Our landfills are full, and we need to have a new plan going forward. as the case might be. So does our First Nation north of us, Berries and Okamasas First Nation. And so together we collaborated and we worked with an organization which certainly Mayor Spence is familiar with, and others. FCM has a program called Community Infrastructure Partnership Program. And so collectively we have got together several times with their assistance, and we're talking about what to do with our collective waste. Not exactly a, as I say, a sexy project, but it's an important one. And it's a project that brings us together, wouldn't you know? And so we've met several times. We've had 3 full-day workshops. Part of it has been simply to get to know each other. And this has been a fringe benefit is to understate it. In fact, it's becoming the core of who we are. And along the way, we said to each other, with FCM's assistance, maybe as we go forward, we should do something called signing a friendship agreement. And that's what we did in the fall, just last year. It was a beautiful day, and our 9 municipalities, along with Chief Roy Petit of Berries and Okamasas, one of his elders, and a singer who danced us through a circle dance at the end of the ceremony. We signed a friendship agreement. It was just a fantastic experience on a beautiful fall day. The geese were flying, the leaves were falling, and it was just a really, really, it was a warm fuzzy, yes, but it was, I also think it was a really important kind of step forward in terms of learning to know each other and agreeing to work together. So it's a very particular project, but along the way, it's really helped us to learn to know each other. And again, this has been a daunting challenge for me personally. I know for my town, and I think some of my councillors, we're not all on the same page, but what the heck, we're doing this project together. It's a very specific project. Where it will go, time will tell. Coming up with a municipal waste plan is a long-term project. Again, the fringe benefit, and again, that's not the right phrase, but one of the key benefits is that we are working together, and we've had a really great time getting to know each other. Just as a little final footnote, there is a sustainability conference, I think, in Ottawa as we speak, an FCM conference, and I've humbly been asked, along with my friend, Chief Roy, to show up there on Thursday and to talk about what we've been able to do. So this is a rather daunting invitation, but nonetheless, it's a heck of an opportunity. And so, again, I reference FCM, CIPP. There are specific projects and programs and people that can help us to move forward on these important issues. And along the way, we build the friendships. So one really other quick footnote, when we were signing our friendship agreement, we happened to have a classroom of a high school classroom. It was a Saturday morning, kind of bizarre, but they were doing some kind of a project. And so they happened to stop by and watch the signing ceremony. And then it ended with a circle dance, and we had some great soup and bannock, and it was a great celebration. Several weeks later, that class went down to Winnipeg at the Human Rights Museum, and they were doing some workshopping and conversations. And I learned much later that one of the students said, referenced having witnessed this friendship signing agreement. And she put that forward as an example of building relationships, recognizing injustice, and going forward. And I thought, that's really beautiful. Who would have thought that as we stumble through this, we do have the opportunity to connect with people that are watching us. And that perhaps is leadership. So thanks again for this conversation. It's been very rich. Thank you.
Thank you for your story. And that's CIPP is the resource through FCM if people are interested in checking that out. So thank you for the tip on that.
Hi, Jordan McPhail, Northern Town of La Ronge. The first thing is I would like everyone to give a huge round of applause for Mayor Rob. The courage that you've shown today by saying that you've looked inside and seen an issue with that first and use that as your foundation to challenge those thought processes and build a framework for reconciliation is huge. And I think that's the first step. I work as you know, council pays very high wages across the province. I work a full-time job with Sask in the telecommunications sector, and what we do in the north is we go in for a week and then we come back into La Ronge for a week. When I went up north for the first couple times, I myself am a First Nations man from the Lac La Ronge Indian Band, and some of the things that I had seen in the north was going into these communities. We would pick up our groceries at the co-op in La Ronge. We would go up and we'd cook with our food and our fresh vegetables and fresh produce. It wasn't until most of these communities are fly in and fly out. And I realized when my groceries didn't make it on the plane that I had to go and then shop at the local grocery. And it wasn't until then that I realized the issues that the northern communities are also facing. I walk into a grocery store, and for myself, I like to have milk with my cereal in the morning. And I walk into the grocery store in Wollaston at this point, and the cost of 1 gallon of milk was $24. It was that same week that I went to, when I was in Wollaston, and I seen that the cost of this milk was $24 a gallon. You walk in and you look at all the vegetables in this area, we're all frozen vegetables, and you wonder why there's an issue with having the health and obesity and the diabetes in these northern areas. Everything that there was in those stores was a frozen product, filled with salt, filled with sugar, salt, and fat, as you would know, goes directly to those issues. So when you look at an area like that and wonder why there are the health issues, number one, you have to ask yourself, why is this happening? And of course, the costs are higher. Now, a secondary thing that you can look at, and what I noticed when I was up there, is I was working on one of the telephone lines, and I seen somebody standing on their roof of their house. And as I was working on this line, I didn't know what was going on. I thought at first they were trying to clean up the roof, because there was a lot of garbage and shoes and you name it thrown onto the roof from vandalism. And then I seen the person jump off this roof and land on their arm. They broke their arm. I'm a first responder, trained as well. I come down from the pole, I walk up to the person, I said, hey, what's going on? At first I think it's a mental health issue because someone's jumping off their roof. They said, I need to break my arm, I need to do something so that I can get a flight out of here so I can afford to feed my family next week. That hit home, because here I am with the privilege of living in a community where groceries are affordable, where I can take them, I can buy them, and I can bring them to this community, and because I was able to do that, I am not in the same understanding that community faces. So I think when we talk about a path forward for reconciliation, when we look at things that we can do for our communities, so when we look at cities like Prince Albert, Saskatoon, and Regina, a lot of these people fly to your community so that they can afford to raise their families in their areas. So I think that has to hit home too. And when you look inside, when you look at the University of Saskatchewan, the University of Regina, and we see the culture shock, as you were saying, and we see these people coming to your community, the health of those people, both physically and mentally, need to be an investment from that city as well, going back to those communities. So as you stated earlier, Mayor Clark, that there was a person that you'd seen from Pachinak. I bet you that if you went into all of the institutions that is in Saskatoon and all the institutions that are in Warman and Regina and other areas throughout the province, you would see that there's a lot of people moving from these areas to there so that they can provide for their families back there. So when we look at a path forward for reconciliation, sometimes it doesn't have to be within your own municipality, but within the areas that these people are coming to your municipality from as well, and providing services back to them. So with that, that's the challenge that I have, is have the courage to look inside your community, see who is represented there, make sure they're represented at your table, and when you go to do your budget and deliberations and a path forward for reconciliation, try and help them where they are too. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for those questions. I think it's been a really rich discussion. And I'm just going to turn it over to my colleague, Councillor O'Donnell, to wrap us up.
So, we gather annually at SUMA, and we kind of look around and we often point fingers and say, those guys got to help us and we need more of that, and let's get some of that. Today would be a little bit different. I think this was called introspection. I think this was called personal. And this is called about how these people have taken a leadership role so that we can look after one another. I appreciate all of you staying, appreciate all of the shared stories, and a little fuzzy from rostering is a very important thing. So, you know, I'm really hoping, as it was suggested here, this is not the last time we do this on this conference, and that we have a real good discussion about this. I'm very pleased, very proud of these people as leaders, and I'd ask you to acknowledge and thank them for being here today. I want to acknowledge MNP and our sponsor. That was very kind to do this today, and I acknowledge, thanks for sharing your daughter with us as well. Tonight, folks, there's hospitality at the Doubletree, starts at 8 o'clock. Hope you can make it. Please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Great.